Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction about myself. My name is Michael Munavu. I'm a software developer with 4 years experience. I started off with Ruby on Rails and I later moved on to Elixir in the past year. I have been working now with Elixir for over a year. I currently work at a Kenyan company called Podii Consultancy, where we offer tech solutions in Elixir and Phoenix LiveView. In my free time, I'm really a creative builder, so I really love working on products. I currently have a few products in the agriculture and the entertainment space that you can look at on my personal websites. So let's look at what we'll be covering today. So today we'll be covering the following topics. The first one is why we should write test in LiveView. The second one is how LiveView tests work. The third one is the anatomy of a LiveView test. We'll later look at code examples, how to use factories to add data when testing in LiveView, what are the best practices when testing LiveView, and we'll have a few bonus tips that help in debugging. I've got this after a few months and months of writing tests and debugging, so I have a few tips for you that will help you on your way. So let's get started. Why should we write test in LiveView? So just today, as I was doing my work, I realized that there's something that was working before and it stopped working, and it's not a feature I'd actually touched on, and I had no idea who had worked on it and why it was not working. So the whole thing is, if I had written test for it, I'd have known, or rather, even it would not have not been merged to either develop or the main branch. So writing tests is usually very, very good for consistency in your code. So we have a few reasons why you should write tests. So test verify that your LiveView components work as expected under various conditions. As you realize, when you're writing your LiveView code, you're writing it in your most optimal state. It's like in the best case scenario, this code will work. In the best case scenario, a user will come onto the system, they will add their username, their password, and they'll log into the system. But you haven't tested for when they add a really short password, what to expect to see. When they add a really long password, what to expect to see. When they add a username that in the system you said you don't allow for it, what they see. Another thing is that it prevents regression. As I've said, just today, if, for example, we had test for that feature, we'd had caught what the problem was. So it acts as a safety net in this case. And the last thing is that I'd say it importantly improves code quality. So I'll now break down the anatomy of a LiveView test. So we'll break it down into four. The first one being you're mounting on the page. The second one being you're selecting a HTML element. The third one being you're rendering a change event. The fourth one being you're asserting that a change has happened. This is how to look. When you're going, for example, in a calculator app, as I've said, when you land on the page, you're just mounting on the page. When you, for example, click or look for the button that says number 2, you are selecting the element with the value of 2. You click on that element and you assert that, for example, when I add 2 plus 2, I will get 4. So that's the anatomy, basic anatomy of a LiveView test. Okay, so I'll break it down again. So the first one is mounting on the page. The second one is selecting an element on that page. The third one is perform a render action. The fourth one is we assert that something happened or something changed. So we look at different code examples for this. We'll just go through the top 3 render actions. For people who are writing Elixir and Phoenix LiveView, I'd assume the top 3 actions that you mostly interact with are render click, render change, and render submit. If you go to the official documentation for the Phoenix LiveView test, you'll find all these different events that you can test for. So you can test for render focus, you can test for render key down. But as I've said, I'll mostly focus on the top 3, as it'll give you an idea of exactly what it is or how exactly to test for in LiveView. So let's look at the first one. The first one is render click. Render click is called when an event occurs on the page. So for example, when you hit any element in your Phoenix LiveView that has a PHX click event attached to it, on a LiveView test, it's the same as saying render click. So if you have a button in your Phoenix LiveView that has a PHX click attribute of add, if to simulate that in our Phoenix LiveView test, we'd call it as render click. Now in the render click, we have to specify the element we are clicking. As you remember in our test, we said that our baby is very, very stupid. And I told you I'd tell you why our baby is very, very stupid. Why I love treating a Phoenix LiveView like a very stupid baby is that it helps me test better because I have to assign IDs to the elements I want to click. So if you look at the calculator app that I'll go back to, so if you land on the page, you might find there is button 1 to button 10. So I want to be sure that I'm clicking on button 1 and not button 10. How would I do that? How I'd do that is by assigning IDs. So I'd have, for the first maybe paragraph that has the element of 1, that has the value of 1, I'd give it an ID of 1. So now my stupid baby knows that I'm clicking the value 1 and not the value 10. So as you see here, I've said we have to specify which element you're clicking in our test so that it's very easy for us to test that a change is happening after you've clicked that on that element. So let's look at a simple counter. As a simple counter, I'm sure most of you have built counters. It's probably the first mini system you built. So a counter is very, very easy. You have a number 0 at the top, have a plus button, you have a minus button. How does this work? When you click the plus button, you expect the value 0 to increase by 1. When you click the minus button, you expect the value 0 to decrease by 1. Let's look at how we write the logic and the HTML for this. So I'll start with the logic. So the first thing is, when I mount onto the page, I want to assign a variable called count, and I want to assign it the value 0, such that now in my HTML, where I have this paragraph with the ID of count, it will have now a value of 0. That's initially how a counter looks like. Then if I now look at my handle event, so I have a handle event for the increment, and I have a handle event for the decrement. So in the increment, what am I handling? So I'm saying that for this count variable, I want to assign it whatever value it was before plus 1. For the decrement, I'm saying whatever this count variable was, I want to assign the count variable that was there before minus 1. So if it was 0, I want to assign it minus 1. If it was 2, I want to assign it 1. Now in our HTML, how this will look like is that I have a button here, PHX click increment, ID increment, PHX click decrement, ID decrement. So the whole idea here is this value is 0. When I click on the increment button, this value is supposed to be 1. Now, key things to note in my HTML mostly is that I've assigned each element that I'll be selecting in my LiveView with IDs. In this way, it's very, very easy for me to check for this in my LiveView test. So you see here, it has an ID of count, ID of increment, ID of decrement. So let's write some pseudocode. If you remember very well, we broke it down into 4. The first one being I mount onto the page, so I mount onto my counter. Second one being I look for my HTML elements, and I expect, for example, in this case, its count to be 0. When I click on the increment button, I then expect now the count to be 1. That's for the increment. For the decrement, I expect that I can go to the home page. When I look for an element with the ID count, I expect it to be 0. If I click the decrement button, and I expect that count to be minus 1. This is a whole flow. If you remember the anatomy of a LiveView test, So the first thing is you mount. The second one is you select a HTML element, then you render an action, then you do your assertion. Now, this is how our live view test for this will look like. We can do it two ways. So you can either select by ID or we can select by element and content. But I prefer selection by ID because it's very, very easy for a stupid baby to know which ID is being selected as you're having unique IDs. So for example, here, let's have a look at this. The first thing is that we mount on the root page and we assert that there'll be a HTML value of 0. Then on our index live, on our live page, we look for an element that is a button that has the content of increments. Then we render a click event onto it. Then now we expect this rendered HTML to have 1 instead of 0. Now how we do that by selection by ID in the element helper. Instead of now having the element in the content, you can just select the ID. So you're looking for an element with the ID of increment. Once you render a click action onto it, you expect the HTML to change. Now onto the decrement flow. In the decrement flow, it will be the same thing. I mount onto the live view page. I assert that in the HTML, I'll see 0 in the counter. I go to my index live. I look for an element that is a button with a decrement value. I render a click action. Now I do this again where I go to the index live or to my live view. I look for an element with a decrement ID. I render a click action. And now since I did it twice, I now expect in my HTML, I won't see -1, but I'll see now -2. Now that's render click. Render click is very, very straightforward. For any element that has a PHX click attributes, you can test it very easily by using the render click helper. We mostly select our elements with the element helper. The element helper, as I mentioned, can either take the content and so that can either take the element and the content, or you can just select it by ID. Now let's look at render change. Render change is mostly seen as in forms. As I've mentioned, we might have something like a registration form. If you want to test that, for example, you've written some backend validation that you don't want your password to be less than six digits. So you might have unit tests for that, but you need to test that it works now in your live view. How would you do that? So the whole idea will be now in this case, I come to my live view page, I fill this form with the password 123, and now I expect my live view to have a text down there like this password is too short. So this is how now I test for render change or change events in my live view. So let's look at a simple search feature. So in a simple search feature, we want to search through records in our database. For this, we'd need to add some data to our test database. Now, this is where factories come into play. Factories are a very, very good way of adding data into our test database that we can be able to use to test out for things that require records. So for example, if you want to test an edit feature where you'd have to have certain records in your database, the best way to do this is by use of factories. So what is a factory in testing? A factory provides a convenience functions for producing different groups of data. They work exactly as factories do, where you build things there. So in this case, you're building some data. For example, you may need to build either a post, a user, a comment, a tweet. And how to do this is by creating a file in your test/support, and you call it factory.ex. This is the basic flow of it. So this is a basic factory file where you have a build function that takes in a parameter. So it's an atom. For example, now if it's building a post, take the post struct and you have the title and the description. And now with this, you can either choose to build a basic post, which will have these basic parameters. You can now pass in this post with your custom parameters that you may want. Now let's work on our search function. So in our search function, with now our factory setup, we can be able to test the search functionality well. Now let's look at how we do this in the logic wise. So in your EX file, how would you write the code for searching? In real sense, in our life, this doesn't matter because we don't even know, we don't care how you wrote your search function. All we care about is that I come onto this platform, I have 10 records. When I search, when I write M, I expect to only see elements with the letter M. That's all I care about. So for example, now how I do this is that I have a change set that references the post context. I have a variable here called post, which lists all the posts. Then I have a handle event, which is search. In this case, I just filter through all the posts, and I look and check if there's any string, there's any element in the string that is contained in the title of each of these posts that are displayed, and I bring back the post. People have different ways of doing the search functionality, but in our LiveView test, this doesn't really matter. All you're caring about is how does my HTML interact with the changes I make. So this is how my basic logic will look like. If I have a form, I have a phexchange attribute here, search. So every time I render any change event here, this handle event is called search, which will just filter through all the posts. Now let's look at how we write test for this. So as I mentioned in factory, by using factory, you can be able to insert different types of data with different parameters. So in this case, if you see, we have post one. So in post one, you can insert, and you're giving it a title of first post, the description of this is the first post. Post two, we have second post, and the description of this is a second post. And you pass it down as it is in the setup function. So now in each of these tests, you can have the collecting post one and post two, the same live view anatomy. It remains. So the first one is we mount onto the page. So as you can see here, we're mounting onto the post route. We are such that in the HTML, I will see the first post and the second post. Then now I'm having a searched HTML variable here. So in the searched HTML, I go into my live view. I'm using the form helper. So in the form helper, this takes the ID and the parameters that you're passing. Now note that these parameters are the same as the ones that you have in your logic here. So if you look at this logic, we have the post and the map with search and query. So it's the same thing here, where now we'll have the post, then the map with search, and the query you're passing. So in this case, you're passing FI, so we expect to only see the first post as it has a title of FI for first post. So here we can assert that in the searched HTML, we'll see post one.title, and we will not see post two.title. As I've said, we match what you pass in the form with the handle event params. So for example, if you have something like post, search, and query, when you're passing the parameters in the live view, you'll have it very similar. We have the post, now we have the map taking the search as the attribute and the FI as the value. For example, in this case, if you had something like game name and game name or game params, how we test that is that we have game and we have a map taking the key value pair of name and test. Now let's look at the final one, which is render submit. Render submit is very, very similar to render change, where, for example, even in our search functionality, let's assume we'd want to list the posts that have been filtered after I hit a select button instead of when I just search for the thing I'm searching for. So we'll just edit our search feature to now handle it with submit instead of handling it with search with change. So in our HTML, our logic won't change. In our HTML, as you can see here, instead of now having phx change, we'll have phx submit. So anytime this form is submitted, the handle event is called. So I'll just go back to the handle event for reference. So this will be called now anytime we hit the search button. Okay, now let's look at how the test will look like. The setup will be very, very similar. Now the only thing that will change is this. Everything is very, very similar when you look at render change and render submits. So the only thing that will change here is this line here. So instead of render change, we'll just call render submits. And now in our search HTML, if you're passing FI, you expect to see the first post and you don't expect to see the second post. Now, I'll look into the best practices when you're writing your live code. You're writing your live code to enhance your live testing. So remember that live test is like a very stupid baby. So ensure you give it proper IDs and unique IDs, which can be able to easily select any element that you're clicking on. The next thing is that you have to test HTML and not HTML structure. So what does this mean? I remember it's my mentor actually who told me about this, testing HTML and not HTML structure. When you look at it, for example, I might test that there's a paragraph next to a div that has this content. But now someone may decide to come and change this paragraph and make it a span. But the value of inside the span or paragraph does not change. So essentially, I should test what is the value of the HTML and not how the HTML is structured. Where I'm not testing whether it's inside a div or a paragraph, as most of the time that will change. So as you see where we're selecting, for example, the increment button, we're selecting it with the button element and the content. It will just be better if we selected that with the ID. So bonus tip, this is one of my favorite ones. We can use the open browser to open the view that we are testing. How this will look like is as following. So you're going to the live view. You have your form. You've passed in the parameters in search. You've passed in FI. So you expect to see, for example, only the first user. So if you just run the open browser helper, this is what you'll see. Okay, so you've seen the power of open browser. It's a really amazing helper that can help you see the exact state of the library that you're testing. The other one that I'll look at is the has element helper. This one takes the view, the select, and a text filter. So this one checks if a given selector with the text filter is on the view. So in this case, can for example look if the count, an element to the ID of count that has a value of 1 exists in the live view. So how we can do that is that we're going to the live view page, we're looking for an element to the increment, we're looking for an element to the increment ID, we are rendering a click event, and we are certain that in this live view, it has an element with the ID of count that has a value of 1. Another thing that I realized is that it's a bonus tip that when you're dealing with links and you want to test a feature, for example, like when you click on a link, you are taken to a different page, you may get an error that the element does not have a click attribute. If you remember, our render click simulates our PHX click in our live view. So to fix this, you just add the element name after you select through its ID as such. So you have the index live, you have the element. How you do this is how you do this prior. So if, for example, take the name, the ID, and it has the content of edit name, and you can render click events. So now the correct way would be you have the ID, give it a space, the element, and now the text content inside it. Now when you render a click event, it will work as you expect it to. Another one is that when you're dealing with form redirects, we use the follow redirect helper. This will be, for example, if you have a pop-up and after filling the pop-up, you're redirected back to a certain page. The flow for this will return an OK view HTML tuple, as you'll see. So in this case, you're going to the live view page, you have a form, you're passing these parameters, you run a click, now you can follow the redirect, and now to get the HTML that is now on the new page, this is how you'd access it. Thank you very much. The slides of this talk will be uploaded in this link that I can share to the chat, so you can be able to look at that. In case of any questions, this is the time for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this presentation. It's really been an interesting one, outlining the way LiveView is usually tested, and I think I encourage everyone to follow those practices because that's basically what it takes to properly test a typical live view. Sometimes, if I can just have a bit of my own say about this, sometimes there is also a necessity to take a bit of a different approach to testing live views. If you follow the link I post in the chat, you will be able to see a test I wrote along with our developer at Curiosum, Piotr, in our permit library, which actually is intended to test the assigns of a specific live view in under certain circumstances, because we needed to ensure that specific assigns are in place instead of just performing this as let's say an integration test, which just kind of interacts with a real live view. And this is based on some code in the hooks live module, particularly that we copied from the tests for Phoenix LiveView itself. And I think I can encourage everyone to also consider this way of testing live views in case it's needed to write tests which are more similar to unit tests, so to speak. But overall, I think both strategies are useful and can have their own benefits. So that's just my my bit of take on it. And now we are going to proceed to a Q&A session. So I'm going to enable the Q&A mode. Oh, it's enabled already. So you can ask questions in the Q&A on the chat. Right, so Jefte or Jefte, I don't know what's the pronunciation of your name is, but thanks for the talk. No questions on my side, so I second that. Thank you very much, Michael, for this talk. This was a great one. Miko is saying that from his point of view, it's been a very good and concise presentation. Thank you very much. So yeah, I totally agree with this. And I think someone else is typing, so maybe there's gonna be another one, maybe this time a question. So if there are no questions to the speaker, then I believe this is about it for today's meetup. Thank you very much, Michael, for your presentation. As I said, it's been a really good one. Unless obviously someone who's typing right now has in fact a question, so we have a moment to wait for maybe one or two of those. But if that's not the case, thank you very much. It's been a great one. And just let me look up my slides. So in the upcoming meetup, you can join us to listen to Nitesh Mishra, a software developer and Elixir enthusiast with experience in this information services industry, with a presentation on Unlocking the Power of Absinthe Part 2, Subscriptions and GraphQL. So this is what we will have in the upcoming meetup. And this time, this 28th edition of the Elixir Meetup by Curiosum is over. So thank you very much again, Michael, for presenting to us. Thank you everyone for being with us today. It's been a pleasure to have you again. And as usual, I will be displaying a poll in which you can let us know what you think about the meetup and the speaker. Again, I would like to invite you to join our social media channels, LinkedIn, Discord, to stay in touch with us and perhaps the speaker too after the meetup, and have a discussion about the presentations we have. So again, thank you very much for being with us, and see you next time. Goodbye.
See you. Have a good night. Thank you.